My name is Ella Twain. I am 29 years old, and I never thought I could feel like a stranger in my own father's house. But that's exactly what happened last Christmas. I walked into my father's house with a small hope that maybe this year he would see me differently. Not as the daughter who had been carrying his debts for years, but simply as his child. Instead, he looked at me with surprise and said he wasn't expecting me for Christmas dinner. That one sentence cut deeper than I can explain. I smiled, nodded, and walked right back out into the freezing Portland night. Sitting alone in my car, his words echoing in my head, I made a single phone call that set something in motion I could never take back. 2 days later, his credit card stopped working. My phone lit up with missed calls one after another, each more desperate than the last. By the time I checked, there were 45. He begged, he raged, he pleaded again. But I sat in silence, letting every ring remind me of the years I had been the one to pay to cover, to save him from shame. That night, I decided to let him feel the weight himself. But what followed wasn't just financial chaos. It pulled my sister into battle, dragged me into court, and exposed secrets buried for years. It became a story about betrayal, justice, and the price of silence. What would you do if the man who raised you left you carrying his burdens? And for the first time, you decided not to pick them up. I promise you this story will take you places you don't expect and show you how one quiet decision can set off a storm that changes everything. I stepped back into the icy air, each breath burning my lungs, my father's voice still circling in my head. Christmas lights flickered across the neighborhood, warm and inviting in windows that weren't mine. I climbed into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. For years, I had taken his words, his dismissals, and forced myself to swallow them. But this time, something in me cracked. The drive home blurred. The drizzle tapped on the windshield like impatient fingers, the wipers beating back the rain in a rhythm that only made me more restless. I drove through streets lined with decorated houses, each one glowing with warmth, laughter spilling out through the walls in my imagination. But none of that belonged to me, not tonight. When I reached my apartment, the building stood quiet, its hallways echoing faintly with holiday music from someone else's unit. Inside, it felt colder than usual, though I knew it was only me, carrying the weight of another rejection. I set my keys down, tossed my coat over the chair, and just stood in the dim light of the kitchen. My hands trembled slightly as I poured water into the kettle, not expecting me. I mouthed the words again, bitter as ashes. I sat down at the table, staring at my phone. I thought of every time I had bailed him out, every late-night call where he needed me to cover another payment, every humiliating moment when debt collectors had shown up at his door and I had been the one to write the check. He never said thank you. He never even asked how I was managing. I was his safety net, nothing more. That night, I dialed one number. My voice was steady, almost cold as I gave instructions. It was short, clinical, the kind of call I had thought about but never dared to make. When I hung up, the silence in the room was deafening. I pressed my palms against the table, the wood firm under my skin, and realized something inside me had shifted. The next morning, I tried to move as if nothing had changed. I made coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, though it tasted weaker than usual. I scrolled through emails from work, forced myself to reply to a few, anything to keep from thinking too much. Outside, the world went on with holiday sales and cheerful music on the radio. But inside me, there was a crack of light breaking through the years of obligation. By evening, the phone began to ring. At first, it was just once his name glowing on the screen. I let it buzz until it died. Then another call, then another. His name kept flashing like a warning I refused to heed. I left the phone on the table and walked into the kitchen, washed dishes that weren't dirty just to keep moving. By midnight, there were more than a dozen missed calls. My apartment was filled with that low vibration every few minutes, rattling the table as if the phone itself wanted to scream. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, slid into bed, and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the city outside was faint, but inside it was only silence. Broken by the occasional tremor of the phone, I didn't answer. I wouldn't answer. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of a house glowing with Christmas lights, a table filled with food, and a chair waiting for me. I dreamed of laughter that reached me, a place where I belonged. Then I woke up and remembered the truth. The calls didn't stop. The next day, he tried again. By the time I checked, the screen showed 25 missed calls. I opened the voicemail once. His voice spilled into the room, rough and sharp at first, calling me selfish, cold, heartless. Then another message came, his tone cracking with desperation. He begged for me to fix things, to help him just one more time. By the fifth message, he was crying. I deleted them all. The number grew. 35 missed calls, 40. Each one a reminder of every year I had answered, every time I had dropped everything to save him. When the total reached 45, I sat at the table, staring at the glowing screen. My breath was shallow but steady, my hands folded together like I was praying. His last voicemail had called me cruel. But still not once had he said he was sorry. Not once had he admitted what he had done to me all these years. I turned the phone face down, folded my arms on the table, and let the silence finally feel like mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix him. I wasn't drowning in his chaos. I was just sitting breathing and realizing that maybe this was what freedom sounded like. The quiet was not empty. It was full, heavy with everything unsaid. I closed my eyes, leaned back in the chair, and for the first time in years, let myself imagine a life where I wasn't carrying his weight anymore. I knew this was only the beginning, but what followed in the quiet after those calls pulled me backward into memories I had tried for years to bury. It started with a flash of my first job after college. I had been 24, fresh out of Portland State University, juggling rent and student loans while working as a receptionist at a small marketing firm. My father had called me one evening, his voice unusually soft, almost pitiful. He said his credit card was maxed out and the bank was breathing down his neck. He needed someone to co-sign a small consolidation loan, just to get back on his feet. He promised it was temporary, that he would pay it back in no time. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the paperwork in front of me, my heart pounding as I signed my name. $25,000. I thought I was being a good daughter, saving him from embarrassment. That night I lay awake telling myself he would come through, that one day he would thank me. The months that followed were filled with overdraft alerts, collection calls redirected to me, and a slow drip of payments I made from my own modest paycheck. Rent was late more than once. Groceries got thinner. Still, I told myself I was doing the right thing. Then came the winter. He slipped on the icy porch and broke his wrist. The hospital bills piled up quickly, over $20,000. I took on a second job evenings at a coffee shop downtown, pouring lattes until close, my fingers aching as I counted tips that would barely cover the minimum payments. I would come home exhausted, staring at the numbers scrawled across overdue notices, wondering how long I could keep it up. One memory that still clung like smoke was the day I paid his car insurance, a lump sum of nearly $3,000 he claimed he could not cover. He had shrugged, smiling like it was nothing, telling me I was a lifesaver. I wanted to believe that smile meant gratitude, but deep down I knew it was a relief. Relief that I was there to catch him again. By the third year, the numbers blurred together. Gas bills, electric shut-off notices, late fees. Small loans he insisted were just temporary. My spreadsheet showed nearly $80,000 in payments I had, shouldered over 5 years. My friends spent their 20s traveling, saving for down payments, and buying new cars. I spent mine signing checks for my father. There was one night that broke me a little. It was just after Thanksgiving, maybe 3 years ago. I'd gone to his house after working both jobs, carrying grocery bags of food I had bought with my credit card. He was sitting with a couple of friends, drinking whiskey, laughing too loud. When I set the bags on the counter, he barely looked at me. One of his friends slapped him on the back, saying how lucky he was to have a daughter like me. He nodded, poured himself another glass, and let me wash the dishes piled in the sink. I drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face, knowing he saw me not as a daughter, but as a cushion. Back in my apartment, I pulled out the old file box from the closet. Inside were the papers I had kept month after month, year after year. Credit card statements, receipts, scanned copies of hospital invoices, the insurance policy with both our names printed neatly at the top. My handwriting scrawled across the payment stubs, evidence of every time I had picked up the slack. I flipped through the stack, my fingers trembling. That was when I found it, a yellowing document tucked between envelopes. A home equity loan agreement. My stomach dropped as I read the lines. The property listed was a small condo I had bought years ago, the only thing that had ever felt truly mine. And there was his name along with mine, his signature just beneath mine. He had convinced me back then it was a formality, that the bank just needed a co-signer. What he had really done was use my property as collateral. I sank onto the couch, the papers spread around me like a storm. Rage simmered under my ribs. Not only had he drained me for years, but he had tied my name to his debts in ways I had never fully understood. The phone buzzed again on the table. Another call from him. I did not answer. I let the sound fade into the night. In my head, I could still hear his voice from earlier, saying he was not expecting me. How many times had I expected him to show up for me, and he never did? My graduation, where he stayed only long enough to shake a professor's hand before leaving, for drinks. The birthday dinners, where he forgot to bring a gift, but remembered to ask for money. The nights I called crying when I was broke and alone, and he told me to toughen up. The weight of it all pressed down on me, heavier than the stack of papers in my lap. I thought of my mother, Margaret, who had left him years ago because she could no longer stand the gambling, the endless excuses, the cold disregard. She had warned me not to follow in her footsteps, not to let him use me the way he had used her. I had not listened. Now, staring at the proof of his betrayal, I realized she had been right all along. I gathered the papers into neat piles, smoothing the edges as if preparing for a trial in my own mind. I did not yet know what I would do with them, but I knew I would not keep them hidden anymore. The rain outside turned heavier, drumming against the window. I sat with the box on my lap, the city lights reflecting off the wet glass, and felt the stirrings of a resolve I had never known before. For years, I had been the daughter who bailed him out, who sacrificed without question. But as the clock ticked past midnight and the unanswered calls filled my voicemail, I understood something had shifted. This was not just about money. This was about dignity. And for the first time, I was ready to fight for mine. I pressed the lid back on the box, slid it under the couch, and leaned back against the cushions. My hands were steady now. My breathing was slow. I let the sound of the rain fill the room. And in that quiet, with the weight of 5 years laid bare in front of me, I knew the storm had only just begun. 2 days later, the thunder hit. I was in line at a small grocery store near my apartment, waiting to pay for bread and milk, when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but the buzzing did not stop. By the time I stepped outside with my bag, I had 6 missed calls, all from my father. The 7th came before I even reached my car. I let it go to voicemail. As I sat in the driver's seat, curiosity got the better of me and I pressed play. His voice was tight-clipped, the way it always sounded when he was trying to hide panic. He said his credit card had been declined at the store, that there must be some mistake, that I needed to fix it right away. I could almost see his face turning red, his jaw clenched, his hands waving at the cashier while people stared. I gripped the steering wheel and closed my eyes. The image of him standing in front of a cashier, the line behind him growing restless, was almost too vivid. For years, I had swooped in before he reached that point, paying balances just in time, covering fees before they went public. This time, I let it happen. By evening, there were 12 more calls. His voice grew sharper in each one. He accused me of making a mistake, then of betraying him, then of trying to humiliate him. I set the phone on the counter while I cooked pasta and let it buzz across the surface like a trapped insect. The next morning, a neighbor who knew my father from the old car business mentioned she had seen him at a diner on Burnside, red-faced and arguing with a waitress after his card was rejected again. She said people were whispering, shaking their heads. I forced a polite smile, but inside a strange satisfaction bloomed. Later that day, I checked my voicemail again. His tone had changed. He was begging now. He said he could not get gas, that his friends had laughed at him when he could not cover the bill for lunch, that he needed me to undo whatever I had done. His pride was cracking, and with every word I could hear the desperation spilling through. I walked to the window of my apartment and looked out at the gray Portland sky. The drizzle had not stopped in days. The city felt washed clean, but inside me, the weight of years of resentment stirred like wet concrete. I whispered out loud, though no one could hear me, "You did this to yourself." That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea while the phone rang again and again. The screen lit up over and over with his name. I let it play out, each buzz like a reminder of every time I had carried his burdens. When the ringing finally slowed, I scrolled through the missed calls. 45. A number so high it looked absurd on the glowing screen. I set the phone face down and stared at the grain of the wooden table. I thought of being 16, standing in line at a store with my mother while my father disappeared outside because he knew his card would not clear. I thought of being 22, picking up groceries for him and watching him pocket cash he swore he did not have. I thought of every time I told myself that next time would be different. The next day, I heard from a friend who worked at a department store downtown. She said my father had tried to buy a new jacket, insisting he needed it for a Christmas party. His card was declined twice. People were watching. He grew angry, claimed the machine was broken, then stormed out, leaving the clerk embarrassed. She asked me quietly if I was doing all right, and I lied, saying I had not spoken to him in a while. By the end of the week, the tension had wrapped around me like a thick blanket. His calls never stopped, each one a mixture of anger, pleading, and confusion. Some nights I played them on speaker just to hear the shift in his voice, the way pride melted into panic. One evening I walked past a bar near his neighborhood. Through the window, I saw him sitting alone at the counter, his shoulders hunched, a half-empty glass in front of him. A couple of men at the far end were whispering and laughing, pointing at him. He slammed money on the bar, but the bartender shook his head, clearly refusing the card he had handed over. My chest tightened, but I did not go inside. I turned away, the cold night air biting my face, and walked quickly to my car. Back in my apartment, I tried to quiet the rush of thoughts. There was a heaviness that came with watching him unravel, but under it was a current of grim relief. For once, he was the one left exposed. The final call that night came just after midnight. His voice was hoarse, almost broken. He said he could not sleep, that he did not know how to explain to his friends why nothing worked anymore, that he needed me. Then the line went silent. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the street lamp casting faint lines across the wall. The sound of his desperation lingered in my ears, but I did not pick up the phone. Instead, I let the silence settle. The 45 missed calls sat there like a monument, proof that the balance between us had finally shifted. And as I closed my eyes, the image of him standing at the register with no way to pay burned itself into my memory, a symbol of all the years I had carried for him, now returned in full. That image of him stranded at the register would not leave me, and by the weekend my phone buzzed with a different name, my sister Linda. I hesitated before answering, because I already knew which side she would be on. Linda had always been the loyal one, the daughter who excused every mistake, who believed our father's promises even after years of watching them fall apart. Still, I pressed accept. Her voice came sharp, almost accusing. "What did you do to your dad?" "He is calling me nonstop, saying you ruined everything." I closed my eyes and steadied my breath. "I stopped paying his bills, Linda, that is all. I stopped being his safety net." There was a pause, then a scoff. "Are you serious? You know he cannot manage on his own. You know he needs help." I felt my jaw tighten. He needs help because he refuses to take responsibility. I have spent years covering for him. Rent, utilities, hospital bills, credit cards. Do you even know how much I have paid? She cut me off, her voice rising. "That does not matter. Family is family. You do not just abandon him when he needs you." I pressed my fingers to my forehead, trying to keep my voice steady. "Family is not supposed to use you like an ATM. There was silence for a moment, then she spoke again, her tone colder now. "If this goes to court, I will testify for him. I will tell the judge you are unstable, that you are exaggerating. Do not think I will protect you." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. My own sister ready to stand against me. I wanted to remind her of the nights she had called me for help with her rent, the times I had babysat her kids so she could work overtime. But I swallowed the words. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Do what you think is right." She hung up without another word. I sat in the quiet afterward, staring at the wall. The weight of her threat settled deep in my chest. For a moment I wondered if I was wrong, if I had gone too far. But then I thought of those 45 missed calls, of my father's laughter with his friends while I washed his dishes, of every bill with my name scrawled across it. No, I was not wrong. I was finally drawing a line. The next day, I drove to my mother's house on the west side of town. Margaret Twain had always lived simply, in a modest bungalow with a tidy yard and shelves full of books. She opened the door with a smile that faded quickly when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me into the warmth of the living room. I sank into the couch, the familiar smell of her lavender candles wrapping around me. I told her everything. The dinner rejection, the calls, the bills, Linda's threat. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling. She reached over and held them. "Ella, you have carried him for too long. I left him because I could not live under that weight anymore. You cannot let him drag you down the same way." Her voice was steady calm, but her eyes shone with a sadness that told me she had lived this story before. "But Linda," I whispered, "she will fight me." "Let her," my mother said firmly. "You have the truth, and you have proof." Her certainty was like a balm. For the first time in days, I felt my breath loosen. We sat together for the long while, the clock ticking softly in the background. My mother poured us tea and we drank in silence. She did not tell me to forgive him, or to go back, or to fix things. She only told me to protect myself. That night back in my apartment, I lay awake listening to the rain. My sister's words echoed in my head, sharp and cruel, but underneath them was my mother's voice, steady and sure. I knew the battle was not only with my father now. It was with the fractures in our family, the loyalties that ran deep and twisted. As the hours passed and the city settled into sleep, I stared at the ceiling, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the lines had been drawn. And when my phone lit up again, this time with Linda's name, I turned it face down on the nightstand and let it ring into the dark. Chapter 5. Ke Hoch Fan Kung. The message on my phone had said simply, meet me tomorrow. I had gone because I wanted answers, but I did not expect what came sliding under my apartment door at dawn the next morning. A thick envelope, heavy enough to feel like a verdict before I had read a single line. The return address was stamped in bold Multnomah County Court. My hands shook as I slit the flap and unfolded the paper inside. A summons, formal and cold. My father had filed a motion against me, the words accusing and precise. He alleged that I had interfered with his finances unlawfully, that I had cut off his payments without cause and left him destitute. The paper felt suddenly too large for my lap, as if the whole thing could smother me under its weight. I read it twice then again because it could not be real. How had it moved from drunken rants and whispered threats to a legal attack? I sank back into a chair, the summons trembling in my hand like a thing that belonged to someone else. I could still see my father's face in the courtroom window the other day, drawn and pale hubris crumpling into fear. Now he had weaponized that fear. My phone buzzed on the table. Linda. I lifted it and answered with a voice I tried to keep even, but it was brittle at the edges. She did not waste words. She told me she knew that she had papers too, that he was finished with me. The accusation was steady in her tone, wintry and hard. She said we would see each other in court, and then she hung up. No pleading, no mercy, only that thin, cold certainty. The image of my sister choosing my father before her own blood tightened, something in my chest. For a beat I felt lighter, as if all my guilt had simply been stripped away with that merciless conversation. Then the panic settled in. If she would stand with him, then his claims might gain traction, at least in the eyes of people who had never bothered to look beyond his tales. The possibility that I could lose not only my dignity, but also my hard-earned security made my hands go cold. I drove downtown without thinking too much about the route, more like a machine following familiar grooves. Diane Cooper's office was a neat block away from the courthouse, a quiet place with a brass nameplate and a potted fern that had seen better days. Diane opened the door before I could knock, her eyes sharp and assessing behind a pair of thin glasses. She was exactly what my mother had promised, a woman of 61 with short silver hair and a manner that shut down theatrics before they could start. I handed her the summons without a preamble. She read with slow care, her lips pressed together, and then she tapped the corner of the paper with one finger. "He is desperate," she said, making the motion almost flippant, but her voice had weight. "He knows his world is collapsing and he wants to drag you down with him." The calm in her tone steadied me more than anything else had yet. For a woman who had seen 1,000 family disputes, she had the particular look of someone who could sort truth from theatrics without blinking. Guilt rose up again like old smoke finding a room, but Diane's hand cut through it. "You need to stop carrying shame that does not belong to you," she said. "The truth is you have the receipts literally. Bring me every bill, every payment record, every note you kept. We will build this case from the ground up." That was the first time in a long while that the word case sat in my ears and felt like a tool instead of an indictment. That night, I dragged the file box out from under the couch where I had stuffed it in a moment of hurried embarrassment. The box lid came off with a soft, dull sound, and for the first time, the scattered papers felt like something manageable. I emptied the contents on my kitchen table and let the evidence breathe. There were credit card statements, some with my name scrawled across the bottom where I had signed to keep the machine from seizing him. There were loan agreements I had never fully read, hospital bills with dates that made my stomach drop, emails where he had asked for help in tones of false humility, receipts for insurance premiums I had paid twice the amount for, because he had assured me the policy would be transferred. Each piece of paper was a memory as much as it was a record, a little stone in the long path I had walked to keep him afloat. I worked until dawn, the overhead light making hard shadows on the documents. I categorized and labeled, stapled and clipped, creating neat stacks that made the jumble I had carried in my head feel sensible. I wrote dates along the edge of one pile, a timeline that stretched for 5 years, each entry a small compromise I had made in the name of family. Sometimes I paused and touched a page, as if feeling it could somehow reframe the past. But mostly I kept the momentum going until I had built a neat, undeniable testament to his dependence and to my unwilling servitude. The next morning I carried the stacks into Diane's office and watched her face as she thumbed through the papers. Her eyebrows rose slightly, impressed and not surprised. "You kept all this?" she said, sounding almost pleased. "Very good. This is not just evidence, Ella. This is your story in black and white." The words struck me. For years I had told my story in trembling phrases in confidence to friends, in muttered complaints over coffee. Having it laid out like that, stamped and dated, felt like armor. We began to plan not with bravado, but with the steady logistics of someone who knew the terrain. Diane explained how he might try to cast doubt, how he could accuse me of manipulation of acting without consent. She warned me that his lawyer would be practiced in turning empathy into leverage. We talked about motions and depositions and what we would need to show under oath. Most of all, she said this was not about revenge. It was about truth, and the law could be the mirror to reflect what had been hidden. Her calm logic grounded me. It made the summons feel less like a trap and more like a call to arms. Preparing meant revisiting. It meant calling the bank and requesting official statements and notarized copies of transfers. It meant digging out old voicemails where his voice was crisp in its demands for cash. It meant compiling emails where he had promised repayment that never materialized. Each phone call did not comfort me, but it built a foundation. I learned to ask for specifics, to request dates and authorizations, and to let the bankers and clerks do what I had done for years without thinking, which was to make paper into truth. The day of the first hearing arrived with a sky the color of ash. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust coffee and the faint citrus of someone's aftershave. There were people in the lobby with folded arms, people who either had official business or simply loved the drama of legal theater. My hands were clammy as I went through the metal detector, but my feet moved with purpose. Diane stayed beside me like a steady presence, her files under her arm, her expression unreadable. Inside the courtroom, my father sat at the petitioner's table, a suit that had maybe looked fine a few months ago now hanging oddly on his gaunt frame. Linda was there beside him, chin raised as if the pose would make whatever she had decided feel right. She did not look at me. The courtroom had a kind of stillness that felt like an audience holding its breath. When the judge entered and took his bench, we all rose. Then we sat and the procedural dance began. My father's lawyer stood first, a practiced man with quick hands and an easy manner. He painted a picture that he thought would stick, of a daughter who had chosen the holiday to abandon an old man who had cut him off out of spite. He described me in clinical tones, brandishing sympathetic phrases that were meant to move a room. Words about family duty obligation. I felt my stomach clench as the story he told rewove the narrative I had been living in, recasting it into a tragedy with me at the center. Diane listened, and when it was her time to speak, she rose with deliberate calm. She submitted the bills in order, each motion folded and marked, each page having a place. She did not shout, she did not plead, she presented. Payments traced back to my bank accounts, monthly transfers stamped with dates, loan payments with my signature. She called witnesses, people who had seen me carry bags into my father's house, friends who had overheard his promises and watched me work overtime to cover them. One by one, the pieces sank into the record. There was a delicate moment when the judge leaned forward, thumbed a page with a frown as if he could not reconcile the weight of paper with the anecdotal testimony my father tried to spin. He said aloud that these payments were significant, and he repeated that Ms. Twain had been the one to cover them. Diane answered coolly, "Yes, Your Honor, every single one." Hearing it in that voice, official and poised, felt like a tiny vindication after years of invisible labor. My father sat rigid, his jaw tight, fingers white at the edge of the table. Linda's posture wavered. She shifted, the defiance losing some of its crispness as the facts piled up in the room. People in the gallery exchanged looks, whispers curving around like wind. I was aware of them in a new way. The strangers who had come for a morning of civic spectacle, now watching a family unravel in real time. When the session recessed, no final ruling was made. The judge wanted further documentation. The lawyers wanted time to examine more precisely. But as we exited into the thin air, something had undeniably shifted. My father passed me without a glance, his shoulders hunched under a weight he had never learned how to manage. Linda walked behind him, but not with the resolute stride she had held earlier. Her eyes flicked toward me once, and I saw doubt there, raw and unprocessed. Outside the courthouse, the cold air bit into my skin. My father brushed past me without a word, Linda trailing behind, her eyes darting away. I watched them go, my chest heavy, but steadier than it had been in days. Diane touched my arm. "This is only the beginning. He won't go down quietly. You need to be ready for the next strike." I nodded, staring at the gray sky above the courthouse steps. I thought I understood what she meant, that he would file more motions, drag me through endless hearings. But as I walked back to my car, the words lingered with a weight I couldn't shake. "He won't stop until he ruins you in every way he can." At the time, I didn't know how far that would go. I didn't know the next attack wouldn't come in a courtroom at all, but in the headlines where the whole city would be invited to watch me burn. Diane's words followed me out of the courthouse and stayed with me like a shadow. "He will not go down quietly." I thought of them again 3 days later, standing in my kitchen with a mug of coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. At first, it was a simple text from Marissa, a woman I worked with at the marketing firm. Her message was short, almost clipped. "Ella, you need to see this." A link sat beneath the words. My stomach tightened as I tapped it. The screen lit up with the headline in bold, screaming louder than any gavel. "Local father abandoned by daughter on Christmas." I felt the blood drain from my face. The photo underneath was an old one, taken at a company holiday event years ago. My smile looked plastered hollow, as though even then I had known what was coming. I read the first lines, each word twisting deeper. My father's quotes filled the page, painting himself as a victim, describing me as cold and vindictive, a daughter who had cut him off out of cruelty. He said I had left him with nothing, forced him into humiliation, and destroyed the family bond. His lawyer added to the chorus, calling me reckless and selfish. The article was not just words, it was a weapon. I scrolled lower. Old friends of his had been interviewed, people who barely knew me but spoke with conviction. They said I had always been spoiled, that he had sacrificed everything for me, that I owed him my life. A neighbor added that I rarely visited, that he seemed lonely every holiday. None of them mentioned the hospital bills I had paid, the nights I had sat in waiting rooms, the groceries I had carried to his door. My chest burned. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The backlash was immediate. Messages poured in before noon. Some were from distant relatives demanding to know what I had done. Others were from numbers I did not recognize, anonymous voices calling me ungrateful, heartless, a disgrace. I tried to breathe, but the walls of my apartment felt smaller with every new ping. The air was heavy with shame, though I knew it was manufactured. I could almost hear his voice whispering through the article, weaving the same stories he had told for years now, amplified by headlines. By afternoon, I was in Diane's office, slamming the printed article onto her desk. She read silently, her sharp eyes scanning line after line. The deeper she went, the tighter her mouth became. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm but edged with steel. "This is calculated. He is shifting the battlefield. Court is not enough for him. He wants to win in the court of public opinion, shame you until you back down." I paced the office, my breath ragged. How do I fight lies when they're louder than the truth? Diane leaned back in, her chair arms crossed. "With facts, Ella, with evidence. But numbers alone won't work here. We need credibility. We need someone beyond the family, someone people trust, to help tell your side." Her words followed me home that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through old contacts, searching for a lifeline. My mind landed on a name I had not thought of in years: Thomas Reed. Thomas was a journalist I had met at a nonprofit fundraiser when I was fresh out of college. He had a reputation for exposing corruption, peeling back the polite surfaces people tried to show the world. I remembered his steady eyes, the way he asked questions that went deeper than anyone else dared. I found his email buried in an old thread, my fingers trembling as I typed. The message was simple, stripped bare. I told him about the article, attached documents, scanned bills, bank statements, proof I had carried burdens my father denied. I ended with a single line: "If you want the truth, I will meet you anywhere." I hovered over the send button, fear crawling up my spine. This was not just legal now, it was public, it was messy. But then I thought of the 45 missed calls, the nights of silence pressed heavy against my chest. I hit send. The reply came the next morning, short but direct. "Let's talk. Coffee tomorrow at 9 downtown." I barely slept that night. My mind replayed scenarios, imagined headlines, and feared the possibility that even the truth could be twisted. Still, when the morning came, I dressed carefully, choosing a plain sweater, pulling my hair back. I wanted nothing polished, nothing performative, only real. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversations and the hiss of steaming milk. I sat at a corner table, my fingers wrapped tightly around a cup I had not touched. When Thomas walked in, tall and serious, notebook already in hand, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. He ordered black coffee, then sat across from me. "Start from the beginning," he said, flipping open his notebook. And so I did. The words poured out like water breaking through a dam. The loans I had covered, the hospital bills with my name scrawled in payment lines, the insurance premiums that drained my account. The condo was entangled in paperwork signed without my consent, the 45 calls piling up while I sat in silence. My voice shook at times, but I did not stop. Thomas wrote steadily, pausing only to ask for dates, amounts, names. His pen scratched across the page, but his face gave nothing away. When I finally stopped, throat raw, his eyes met mine. "This isn't just a family dispute, this is exploitation. Are you prepared for the storm if I publish?" I hesitated. The word prepared felt too strong. I was tired, brittle, worn, but I nodded anyway. 2 days later, the article appeared. This time, my story filled the page. The evidence was laid out in black and white. Documents quoted timelines, spelled out sacrifices, cataloged. Neighbors who remembered seeing me carry groceries spoke. Former colleagues who had watched me decline dinners to pay medical bills added their voices. The narrative shifted. For the first time, people could see the years of quiet labor, the hidden sacrifices. My phone buzzed again, but not with anonymous insults. This time, messages came from friends, co-workers, even strangers who thanked me for speaking. Some shared their own stories of parents who had drained them dry, of siblings who betrayed them. I read each one with a lump in my throat. Then came the calls I expected. My father's number flashed again and again, then Linda's. When I finally answered hers, her voice was sharp, trembling with fury. "How dare you drag this into the press? You're humiliating us all." I held the phone tight, my voice low but steady. "No, Linda." He humiliated himself. I just stopped hiding it. There was silence, then a string of curses before she hung up. I set the phone down, staring at the article still glowing on my laptop screen. The truth was out there now, unshakable, undeniable. But with truth came exposure, and with exposure came danger. That night, the rain tapped against my window as I lay awake. I knew this was not the end. My father had lost ground in court and in public. That combination would make him desperate. And desperation, I had learned, could be ruthless. I closed my eyes, listening to the storm outside. The war was not finished. It was only changing shape. The kind that would not be fought in headlines but in courtrooms and living rooms where family ties frayed into threads too thin to hold showed itself the very next weekend at my mother's house. Margaret had invited me for dinner, her way of keeping me grounded. She knew I had barely been eating and sleeping, and she wanted to remind me I was still someone's daughter worth caring for. The smell of roasted chicken filled her kitchen, warm and comforting, and I almost let myself believe I could relax. But halfway through setting the table, headlights cut across the window. My stomach dropped when I saw Linda's car pull up. She walked in without knocking, her jaw set, her coat still dripping with rain. Her eyes locked on me immediately. I told her she could not barge in, but she ignored me, moving straight to our mother. "You're letting her tear the family apart," she snapped. "You sit here and cook for her while Dad is humiliated everywhere he goes." My mother's face tightened. "Enough, Linda. Sit down or leave." But Linda turned on me, her voice sharp like glass. "Do you know what you've done? His friends won't even pick up the phone. He is a laughingstock. He says he might lose the house." I clenched my fork, my pulse thudding in my ears. "He is losing because of choices he made, Linda. I just stopped cleaning up after him." Her voice rose louder, her hands flying up. "You're destroying him because you're bitter. Because you never got the attention you wanted." The words stung, though they were not new. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping across the hardwood. I wanted to yell, to spit every memory of nights I paid bills while she looked the other way. But before I could, my mother's voice cut through, firm and steady. "That's enough." Linda froze, her mouth still open. Our mother stepped between us, her hand trembling but her eyes fierce. "I lived with your father longer than either of you," she said. "I know exactly what he does. Ella is not destroying him. He is destroying himself." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Linda's face crumbled, then hardened again. "You'll regret this," she hissed at me before storming out the door. The sound of her car engine faded into the night. I sank back into my chair, my chest heaving. My mother poured me tea with hands that shook slightly, then set the cup in front of me. She did not say, "I told you so." She just looked at me with eyes full of both sorrow and strength. That night, I lay awake on her couch, staring at the ceiling. The fracture between Linda and me felt final. The thought of testifying against my own sister twisted in my stomach, but I knew the line had been drawn. The next week, the line became sharper. Court was scheduled again, and this time the tension crackled like static in the air as we all entered the room. My father looked thinner, his suit looser on his frame, his eyes dark with anger. Linda sat beside him, avoiding my gaze. The hearing moved quickly, Diane presenting our organized files, the judge listening intently. But mid-session, my father demanded to speak. He stood, his voice raised, saying I had manipulated documents, that I had taken control of his accounts without permission. The gallery murmured the sound like a wave washing over me. Diane objected firmly, but the damage was done. His words had filled the room, planting seeds of doubt. My pulse raced. For a moment, fear clawed at me. Then Diane placed her hand on the stack of papers, her voice cutting clean through. "Your Honor, we have notarized records from the bank itself. If Mr. Twain wishes to claim forgery, he will need to explain why the bank's own signatures match these documents." The judge frowned, flipping through the files again. My father's face paled, his lips pressing tight. Linda shifted uncomfortably, her hand twitching against the table. When the session ended, no ruling was given yet, but the air told me everything. My father was unraveling, and Linda knew it. I caught her glance as we walked out. For a flicker of a second, her eyes softened, the anger replaced by something like doubt. Outside the courthouse, the rain had picked up, drumming against the concrete. I pulled my coat tighter, my breath clouding in the cold. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow," it read. "I know something about your father." I stood there frozen in the rain, the phone glowing in my hand. A shiver ran down my spine, but not from the cold. For the first time, I realized I might not know the full story. The first thought that hit me was whether the message was a trap. I stared at the words glowing on my phone, my heart hammering. "Meet me tomorrow. I know something about your father." No name, no details, just that. I set the phone down and paced the living room, my mind spiraling through possibilities. It could be Linda trying to corner me again. It could be one of his friends, eager to intimidate me into backing off. Or it could be real. By morning, I decided I could not ignore it. I chose a cafe downtown, crowded enough to feel safe, but quiet enough for a serious conversation. When I walked in, a woman in her early 40s stood up from a corner table. She had short dark hair, a worn leather jacket, and eyes that looked both cautious and determined. She extended her hand. "Sophia Clark." I shook it, my voice hesitant. "Ella Twain." She leaned forward once we sat down. "I used to work for your father. Years ago, at the auto shop. He ruined me." Her story came out in fragments, each word laced with bitterness. She had been a manager, trusted with books and payroll. My father had convinced her to sign off on certain loans in the company's name, swearing he would handle the payments. Instead, he siphoned money for gambling, leaving her legally tied to debts that weren't hers. By the time she realized it was too late, she lost her house, her marriage, everything. My stomach knotted as she slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of court documents dated almost 10 years earlier. His name appeared on every page alongside hers. He had walked away with barely a scratch while she carried the blame. I looked up at her, my throat tight. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw what he's doing to you in the papers. Because no one believed me back then, but maybe they'll believe you." Her voice cracked, but she held her chin high. I carried shame that wasn't mine for too long. "Don't let him make you do the same." I swallowed hard, sliding the folder into my bag. "Thank you," I whispered. When I walked out into the drizzle, the city felt different. He hadn't just used me. He had a history, a trail of destruction stretching years behind him. And now I have proof. That night, I spread Sophia's documents alongside my own. 2 stories, decades apart, telling the same truth. My anger grew sharper, but so did my resolve. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a pattern, a lifetime of exploitation. Still, the closer the court date loomed, the heavier the air around me grew. I could feel eyes on me at the grocery store, whispers when I walked into work. The articles had stirred gossip, and though Thomas Reed's piece had helped, my father still had loyal defenders. Then Linda called. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. She didn't start with anger this time. Her tone was lower, uncertain. "I've been thinking, Ella, about what Mom said, about what you said." I closed my eyes, holding the phone close. "Go on. I don't know anymore. Dad is furious, but I can't shake the feeling he's hiding more. He won't answer certain questions." Her voice cracked softer now. "Did you find something?" I hesitated, then said yes. "I met someone. A woman named Sophia. She showed me documents. He did the same thing to her years ago." There was silence, just the faint sound of her breathing on the line. Finally she whispered, "Oh my God." I wanted to hate her for siding against me before, but in that moment, all I felt was relief. She was doubting him, maybe for the first time in her life. Before she hung up, she said, "If this goes to trial, I don't know where I'll stand, but I can't promise I'll lie for him." I sat in the quiet after, my chest heavy but lighter than it had been in weeks. The night before the next hearing, I lay awake staring at the stack of evidence on my table. My father's voice echoed in my head, angry and desperate, but so did Sophia's, steady and scarred. And when I finally closed my eyes, I knew the battle ahead wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about exposing him fully for everyone to see. It was about exposing him fully for everyone to see. And that moment arrived faster than I could prepare for. The courthouse steps were crowded the morning of the trial, cameras flashing in the gray Portland light. Reporters shouted questions, their voices sharp above the drizzle. I kept my eyes forward, clutching the folder of documents against my chest, while Diane walked beside me, calm and steady. My stomach churned, but my steps didn't falter. Inside the courtroom was packed. Neighbors, old coworkers, even distant relatives filled the benches. The air buzzed with tension, whispers darting like insects through the room. When my father entered, Linda followed close behind. He wore the same oversized suit, but his face looked thinner, more worn. He lifted his chin high, though his eyes betrayed the cracks. The judge opened proceedings, the gavel sharp against wood. My father's lawyer launched into a speech about betrayal, painting me as a vengeful daughter. He waved his arm, spoke of tradition, family, Christmas, and duty. The gallery nodded along, some eyes narrowing at me. Then Diane rose. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. She simply began laying the papers on the table one by one. Bank statements, receipts, signed loan agreements, each with my name in black ink, each one proof of years I had spent carrying debts that were never mine. She called me to the stand. My legs trembled as I walked forward, but once I sat, the words came easier than I expected. I spoke of nights I worked 2 jobs to pay his hospital bills, of the condo tied to his loans, of the 45 missed calls. My throat tightened, but I kept going. For once, I wasn't protecting him. Then came the moment Diane had prepared me for. She called Sophia Clark. Gasps rippled through the room as she walked to the stand. My father shifted in his seat, his face draining of color. Sophia's voice was steady as she told her story. The loans, the debts, the collapse of her life. The courtroom was silent, the only sound her words filling the air. She held up the old court documents pages, stamped and sealed. The judge studied them carefully, his frown deepening. When she stepped down, the gallery erupted in whispers. I caught Linda's face, pale and shaken. Her eyes darted between Sophia and my father, disbelief written clear. Then it was his turn. He stood, his voice cracking as he tried to shout down the evidence. He called Sophia a liar, claiming I had manipulated her into coming forward. His words tumbled, frantic, disorganized. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Diane objected calmly, each time cutting him short, until the judge slammed his gavel for silence. The sight of my father, once so full of bluster, now unraveling before everyone, was something I had dreamed of and dreaded all at once. But the collapse didn't end there. 2 days later, he appeared at a Christmas gala hosted by the Portland Chamber of Commerce. He had been invited weeks earlier before the articles, before the hearings. He arrived late, trying to hold on to his old image, shaking hands, forcing smiles. But whispers followed him sharper this time, fueled by headlines and courtroom testimony. I hadn't planned to attend, but Thomas Reed had called me, urging me to come. He said it wasn't just about the trial anymore. It was about the truth taking root, where my father still pretended to hold power. So I went, standing at the edge of the ballroom in a simple black dress, watching him work the crowd. At first, people greeted him with cautious politeness, but as conversations shifted, as Thomas's articles circulated hand to hand, their faces hardened. One by one, backs turned, smiles disappeared. Then George Miller, an old business partner of his, stood up in front of the room, his voice carrying over the music. He spoke of unpaid debts, of promises broken. He pointed directly at my father, his voice rising with fury. "You've cheated me and everyone else here." Gasps rippled through the hall. My father stammered, tried to laugh it off, but more voices rose. Former colleagues, neighbors, investors, each with their own story, each one cutting deeper. I stood frozen, my heart pounding as the scene unfolded like theater. The man who had towered over me for years now stood shrinking under the weight of his own lies, his face red, his hands trembling. The crowd turned fully, no longer whispering, but accusing outright. He stumbled back, knocking into a table, the sound of breaking glass ringing through the hall. For a moment, the entire room seemed to close in on him. I turned away, my chest tight with a mixture of relief and grief. This was the end of the image he had fought so hard to protect. As I walked out into the cold December night, the sound of his voice still echoing behind me, I knew the final reckoning hadn't yet come. The court would make it official. But in that ballroom, under the glow of chandeliers, his downfall had already begun. The court made it official 2 weeks later, and I can still remember the silence in that room when Judge Harper read his decision. He declared that my father's claims were unfounded, that the evidence showed years of exploitation, not support. He acknowledged the testimony of Sophia Clark, the receipts, the bank records, every page of the life I had carried on my back. He ordered my father to repay a portion of what I had spent, though I knew he never could. More important than the money was the ruling itself, the recognition that I had not been the villain in his story. I sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap while the words sank in. My father's face sagged, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Linda's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. For the first time in my life, I saw him stripped of power. Afterward, I stepped into the hallway where Thomas Reed waited with his notebook. He asked me how I felt, but I couldn't put it into words. I only told him the truth, lighter, like I can breathe again. That night, I went to my mother's house. She hugged me long and hard at the door, whispering that she was proud. We ate dinner at her kitchen table, just the two of us, the smell of roast chicken filling the air again. For once, there were no arguments, no shadows looming in the corners, just peace. Linda came by a week later. She stood on my porch, her eyes tired, her hands shoved into her coat pockets. When I opened the door, she didn't ask to come in. She only said she was sorry, her voice breaking. She admitted she had believed him because it was easier than facing the truth, and she didn't expect me to forgive her. I didn't have an answer that night, so I just nodded. Maybe forgiveness would come one day, maybe not. Christmas arrived quiet and simple. I decorated a small tree in my apartment, lights twinkling softly against the window. For the first time, there was no expectation of bailing someone out. No last-minute scramble to cover a bill. I bought myself a gift, just one, and wrapped it with care. It felt like reclaiming something I had lost long ago. My father didn't call. Not once. His silence was louder than all those missed calls combined. I heard from neighbors that he kept to himself now, avoiding the places he once strutted through. His name had become a warning, not a boast. One evening, I sat alone with a cup of tea watching the snow fall outside. I thought about the years I had spent cleaning up his messes, the guilt I had carried, the shame that wasn't mine. And I thought about how quickly it had turned once I chose to stop. Justice doesn't always come in the form of a check or a verdict. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the space you carve out for yourself when you refuse to carry someone else's weight anymore. I breathed deeply, letting the quiet fill me. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next crisis. I was simply living. And now as I look back on everything, I wonder how many others have faced moments like mine, standing between loyalty and survival, between love and self-respect. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone else and protecting yourself? What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts with me, because stories like mine are not rare, and maybe together we can remind each other that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing we can do. So if this story moved you, let me know. Leave a comment, tell me what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories of justice, karma, and the strength it takes to finally stand up.